Hi, my name is Lydia Nuroff, and I serve as the project manager for the Virginia Untold project at the Library of Virginia. This presentation will include a general overview of the project and background information, a demonstration of how to access the site and documents, a demonstration of using various record types in a hypothetical research scenario, and finally conclude with a story we discovered using records from Richmond City. This presentation was given at the National Genealogical Society Conference in May and June of 2023, and it has been edited for a general presentation demonstrating Virginia Untold. Virginia Untold is an online portal that provides digital access to the records that document enslaved and free Black people in the Library of Virginia's collections. We now have over 22 record types and over 18,000 documents digitized through Virginia Untold. The Virginia Untold website can be accessed using either of the URLs on the screen here, and I'm going to be demonstrating how to find that information and how to access it from the Library of Virginia's website as well throughout this presentation. Why Virginia Untold? I think it's important to talk a little bit about the background of this project and why we decided to put so much effort into this particular work in the first place. Virginia Untold was actually started in 2013, long before I, the project manager, started in 2021. We were motivated by other projects and institutions around us that were recognizing the power, but also the absence of record types that specifically mentioned enslaved and other people of color in the collections. They're difficult to find. They're buried in core boxes that you can see on the screen here, very much like this one. And digitizing them provided access to names and stories of individuals that would otherwise be very difficult to find during traditional research methods. What started as a naming project, like many of the other projects that provide access to these types of records, really has evolved into a focus on record types and understanding how unique record types in our collections tell a unique story of Black history in Virginia. And I'm going to be talking a lot about record types today in this presentation and how understanding the context and the laws that Virginia was enacting in the antebellum period really showcase their fear and desire to control people of color. The Unknown No Longer project, which was started by what was the Virginia Historical Society and is now the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, got off the ground in 2011 and was one of the motivators for us to understanding the importance of putting these materials online. We now provide access to the Unknown No Longer project through Virginia Untold, which I will demonstrate as we move into that part of the presentation today. In 2020, we received a grant from the National Archives to hire a project manager, and I started a year later in 2021 as the grant-funded project manager for Virginia Untold. I was tasked with working on two separate things, overseeing the digitization of our free registers, as well as processing records from Richmond City. We're in the process of putting these materials online still. The grant has concluded, and I can now say that my position has been permanently funded through state funds, which means that this work will continue indefinitely, which is really exciting for us. What is in Virginia Untold? Well, essentially, Virginia Untold is a searchable database with digital images, many of which have actual transcriptions that you can search. Many of you may know, or some of you might not be familiar, that the Library of Virginia is the state repository for government documents in the state of Virginia. So most of what you will find in Virginia Untold are government records. The majority of the records in Virginia Untold are local government records, which means they were created at the local levels of government, like the courthouses across the state in the counties and the cities. We have digitized many of the local records that are currently here at the Library of Virginia. So in some cases, we actually house records from localities here at the library. And because they're here, it's easy to access them and digitize them and put them online. But when you're searching, whether it's in Virginia Untold or elsewhere, it's important to remember that many local records still remain in the localities, in the courthouses across Virginia. And so just because something doesn't come up in your search in Virginia Untold doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It could mean that we have not digitized it yet, that it's here at the library and we just haven't had a chance to scan it, or that it exists in the localities in a local courthouse, for example, in Henry County, Virginia. It could also mean that it never existed or it was burned, which has unfortunately happened to many of our records across the US. There are also state government records in Virginia Untold, and there aren't as many of these, but we are working to expand the access to state government records in our database. There are some instances where we will choose intentionally to digitize a state collection that complements records in the local government records collection that are already digitized for Virginia Untold. So for example, we have started digitizing criminal records, what we refer to as Commonwealth causes, that are found in the local courthouses across Virginia. These criminal trials are essentially charge free Black and enslaved people with a number of different crimes. But during a certain time period in Virginia, if an enslaved person was convicted of a capital crime, they could be sentenced to being hung, executed, or sold and transported out of the state. In these cases, enslavers would actually lose money on their enslaved property, and they weren't so happy about that, so they could submit a claim to the state treasury or the auditor of public accounts, which is what it's referred to as a collection. They could submit a claim asking for payment to be reimbursed on the loss of their property. That record actually exists in the public claims records that we've digitized as a part of Virginia Untold. It provides further information that actually matches the information in the criminal record. So the name of the enslaver, the name of the enslaved person, but it might also provide value of the enslaved person, and in some cases even detail what happens to the enslaved person and where they end up. So putting those two documents together is really powerful, and we want to provide access to both of them within the Virginia Untold database. The time frame for Virginia Untold does focus very specifically on times of enslavement in Virginia. We do go a little beyond 1865 for some of our records because it's important to sort of get into that Reconstruction era to connect people over that wall of slavery. Some of the records start as early as late 17th century, especially for some of the more eastern localities. We have over 20 record types in Virginia Untold, again, that tell what we think is a unique story of Black history in Virginia. And I'm going to show how to learn more about those record types from the website. But first, let's talk about how to search the Virginia Untold website, or how at least to access the site. So one of the easiest ways is to actually use the URL that I provided on an earlier screen, which will take you directly to the website, which you can see here. So that will take you directly to that homepage. But you can also access Virginia Untold through the Library of Virginia website. So using www.lva.virginia.gov, you can utilize the catalog toggle button here to search the LVA catalog. You could just type anything into this search bar and it will take you to the Library of Virginia's catalog. So make sure that you do toggle on that button. I, for example, searched Suki Stewart, and it will take me out to a list of results. But the most important thing to do from here is to click the Virginia Untold search tab, which comes up now at the top of all of our catalog pages. So you can now always find the Virginia Untold search at the top of the page when you're in the catalog. Selecting that button will again take you out to this very familiar homepage. You can also use the Virginia Untold resource guide or LibGuide that we've created. This URL at the bottom of the page will take you directly to the Virginia Untold LibGuide that we have put together. This LibGuide is really useful because it provides a lot of background knowledge that I explained earlier within this particular resource. It provides information about the record types. It provides a related resources page, which is really useful. It takes you to other sites that have digitized material around Black history that could be relevant to the searches that you might be doing. There's also ways that you can participate in our project. And there's also a breakdown of searching. So I definitely encourage checking out the resource guide before or during accessing the Virginia Untold website and its resources. You can access the LVA LibGuide from the Virginia Untold homepage as well. It is the far right button on the Virginia Untold website. You can also access Virginia Untold through the Digital Collections Discovery page. This is a really useful tab, I think, for maybe educators or those that are really interested in understanding the record types themselves. So again, if you're utilizing the homepage here, the search by record type button will take you to our Digital Collections Discovery page. And this is where we've actually broken down all of the record types into sub-collections. So you could go directly into, for example, the deeds of emancipation and search for a particular individual. We've also created sub-collections of various topics like Nat Turner's insurrection or Gabriel's rebellion. We have documents associated with those two events in Virginia that we have collected into a sub-collection available on this page. We've also provided access to the Unknown No Longer records on this page. So if you were looking in real time on the screen, you would scroll down and find the Unknown No Longer page. As I mentioned earlier, there are now 22 record types in Virginia Untold, distinct record types. This URL at the bottom of the page here is going to take you out to a PDF document that shows all of these record types, gives you a contextual overview of them, and then explains the types of information that you may find in each of them. I would definitely suggest utilizing this document while you're doing your research. Understanding why these records were created is absolutely a priority for doing effective research in the database or anywhere. Speaking of record types, one of our latest and newest record types that we've added to Virginia Untold are known as the free negro registers. And this was actually a project that I was in charge of overseeing while I was the grant-funded project manager. These register books actually result from a 1793 Act of Assembly that required all of the clerks in the urban localities or the towns throughout Virginia to record their free people of color. They wanted to cut down on the number of quote unquote Negroes that were going at large. But a few years later, 10 years later, in 1803, they actually expanded this law to cover all Virginia localities, realizing that it was really what they thought an issue across the state of Virginia. The clerks were required by law to record things like the name, age, complexion, the height, and the emancipation or free status of each individual. Some clerks began recording additional information like identifying marks and scars or other physical characteristics, where people were born, who their former enslavers were, and where those enslavers were from. So as you can imagine, these record books are incredible genealogical tools that provide access to so much information about a free person of color. So we definitely wanted to focus on them as a record type for Virginia Untold. They also, however, tell a very interesting story that is continuing in Virginia at this time of the state's issues or the state's maybe intentions of controlling the movement of its free people of color. Free people were required to register, and then they were issued a free registration paper that they had to carry with them at all times. If they were caught without this registration paper, they could be put in jail. And we see this happening too. We have a lot of records showcasing where free people were in jail because they didn't have their registration papers. So again, register books are extremely useful for understanding this unique story of Black history, and then also doing really effective genealogical research if your ancestor is a free person of color. So we now have over 40 registers available in Virginia Untold. Not all of them have been indexed. So that means that when you go to search the site and you search by a name, if your particular register, the person that you're searching for in a particular register, if that has not been indexed, it will not come up in the search results. So this work is ongoing. It changes all the time. If you can't immediately find your ancestor and you know they were free and we have the register book, go to the actual register and search through it manually because it might just not be coming up in your search. But we have crowdsourced the indexing of these registers. It's actually, you can help out with this process that I will explain at the end of this presentation. So we have 40 available, over 40 actually, but this work is ongoing. So we are continuing to digitize records, register books, that are in the localities throughout Virginia. We are working with clerks to provide digital images through the Virginia Untold website, even if we don't acquire the actual physical book. So again, this is ongoing work, both the indexing and the acquiring of digital images. So continue checking back. We do provide updates via social media or blog posts when we've made some really significant updates to this particular collection. So now I'd like to move into the second part of this presentation, the demonstration portion. And I just want to start by explaining that I have chosen a hypothetical, or maybe not even hypothetical because I actually found this individual, but I have chosen a research scenario in which I know there will be a lot of results for a person in which I'm searching. This might not be your case. This might not actually happen to you or be your experience. You will always have to move outside of Virginia Untold to find more information and more records about the person for which you're searching. However, I think that this example gives a demonstration of the potential of Virginia Untold, certainly understanding what the record types might hold in terms of information. I began with finding this entry for a free person of color named John B. Simmons in the Petersburg Free Register. This is an effective example because we actually don't have the Petersburg Register online yet. So hypothetically, I could have come across this book that's just a physical version, and I would like to go find out more information about John using the Virginia Untold website. I'll just read out the entry to you. John B. Simmons, a free man of color, is hereby duly registered in obedience to an order of the court made on the 20th of May, 1859, and is now of the following description to wit: 5 feet 9.5 inches high, about 21 years of age, of black complexion, has a large scar on his right shoulder and one maybe in or on his right, and was born free in the county of Prince George of parents who were free before the 1st day of May, 1806. Signed, presumably by the clerk. So we have a lot of information about John. Let's talk about what this register entry provides us with. The entry tells us that John is 21 years of age in a particular day and time, which helps us try to figure out a potential birth date of, we could say, around 1838. Anecdotally, I could tell you that the register books are fairly accurate in terms of providing dates and ages for individuals. Unlike the census, which many of us might know that sometimes can be off as many as 10 years, the register books seem to be more accurate in providing an age for an individual. Something to keep in mind. We know that John is born free. He was not emancipated, so we're not looking for a deed of emancipation or a will document. We can rule that sort of documentation out of our search. We also learned that George was born in Prince George. He was being registered in Petersburg, which makes sense. He may have moved there for more opportunities, urban localities such as Petersburg, but he was born in Prince George. And his parents were free before May 1st, 1806. So they're not necessarily born free. We don't know that based on our information. So we shouldn't rule out maybe documentation for his parents' emancipation. That's something we just don't know yet. So using this information, let's go to the Virginia Untold database to see what we can find. Starting with the homepage here, I'm just going to start with a general search using my white search bar at the top where it says search anything. And so inputting John's full name, John B. Simmons, we're in quite luck here that John had a middle name, so we can further sort of identify him as the actual John that we're searching for. This search result pulls up this particular search pulls up 90 results. That's a lot to wade through, and we have more information. So why don't we try refining it a little bit? So I'm going to go to the left side of my page here under Refine Your Results and use my filters or facets to kind of cut down on the amount of search results that I was provided with. So first I'm going to start with locality, also known as coverage. So as you can see here, this provides the localities in which these search results came up. You see that we get little hints actually after some of the localities indicating how many records might be associated. I'm just going to select Petersburg and Prince George because we know John's registered in Petersburg. We know that he was born in Prince George. So let's start with those localities. I'm going to select Apply Filters. And then I'm also going to refine by date. So we know that John is born sometime around 1838. I fudged a little and made it actually 1835 so we could give it a little bit more wiggle room. And we're going to go straight up to 1867, sort of the end date on our database here. And I'm going to refine by date as well. So clicking refine will then put all of my filters into the active filter state. And so we can see always what we're filtering by at the top of the page here. If I selected remember all filters, I could lock these in place and actually do a new search up here if I wanted. But using these filters, I narrowed my search down to 11 results, which is much more digestible for me and something that I feel comfortable starting to work through. So from here, I'm already seeing 2 documents that really seem of interest and seem to match my particular individual. So let's go ahead and select the Freedom Suit, which is coming up at the top of the page. And just a note that you can trust Virginia Untold in most cases to pull up your results by relevance. So this is what the computer thinks is the most relevant to what I've searched here, this Freedom Suit. Clicking on the title or the document will take me to this intermediary sort of metadata page. And I can select Available at Rosetta Digital Repository, which actually takes us to the digital image. So just know that if you want to get to the image, which I assume all of us are trying to do, you need to select this highlighted blue text. Doing so takes us to the repository. So now we see our digital document, which appears to be 3 pages long. Note that there's a transcription of this text, which is very useful because this clerk's handwriting is not what I would call the most legible. Many of the documents in Virginia Untold have been fully transcribed. So make sure that you're always looking for that transcription. Also note that the descriptive information or metadata, which was available on the previous page, is also now available on the right-hand side of the screen. It's going to tell me what a Freedom Suit is. It's not going to tell me what's happening in this specific document, but it's going to give me a general supplied text about what Freedom Suits are. It's not as expansive as what is in the record type context document, but just know if you need to quickly remind yourself, oh yeah, that's what a Freedom Suit is, it's going to be available on the right-hand side of the screen. So let's take a look at what's happening in this document. I'm going to select the transcription, which takes me to the PDF. Some volunteer has transcribed this for us, which is great, but also keep in mind that we do not correct the errors in this document. That means that as a researcher, it's up to you to compare what you see in the transcription to what you find in the original. That's why we provide both. Just something to be aware of. There's actually some transcription errors that I noticed in this particular one. So again, not perfect. That's just the system that we have in place. Let's just read through this first page that's provided for John B. Simmons and see what we're looking at here. So I've copied it out onto the screen. To the worshipful hustings court of Petersburg, and your petitioner John B. Simmons, a free boy of color and underage, humbly represents to your honorable body that he is the son of a certain Minerva Simmons, who was born free, and that she is the daughter of a colored woman called Sarah Ann Heath, who was also born free, and she was the daughter of a woman of color by the name of Mason Spurlock, who was born free, and was the daughter of Sarah Heath, who was emancipated by Austin Heath of the county of Prince George many years ago. That he is now held in slavery by Charles T. Scott of this city. That it is his object and desire to sue this court in forma pauperis, which means that he was poor and he could not afford an attorney, for his freedom, and he humbly petitions your worship to permit him to do so and to assign him counsel, since he can't afford it, and appoint an agent to assist him in prosecuting his suit. That your worships would make such and other further orders as may be proper in the promises and the future stages of his suit. We have a date, February 19th, 1852. So John is essentially submitting this document saying that he wants to sue the court because he's held illegally in bondage. Freedom suits are exactly that. When a free person of color is held in slavery against the law, they could take suit to the court and sue for their freedom. Freedom suits are really powerful documents because they often provide information or evidence about how and why that person was free. But let's talk about that in a little bit. So I actually jumped to the last page of this freedom suit so I could understand what the court ruled. So the petition of John B. Simmons, being of color, that was the statement within on February 1852. It says that the defendant was discharged from Charles T. Scott and ordered to be bound out. So we're going to come back to that language in a minute, but just really interesting to know sort of what happens and when. So wow, the freedom suit has given us so much information. As I was saying, they typically provide evidence of how a person was free. We know that slavery follows the mother's line. So in this particular case, John is trying to prove that all of the women in his family, that his mother's line was free. He was never enslaved. His great-great-grandmother was, but she was emancipated years ago by a man named Austin Heath. So we not only have John's mother's name, we have his grandmother's name, we have his great-grandmother's name, and we have his great-great-grandmother's name and who she was emancipated by. This is great genealogical information. We could take this in so many different ways. We also know the outcome of the case. John was discharged from this individual named Charles T. Scott, and he was ordered to be bound out, which may indicate that John was then put into another apprenticeship situation, that he was bound to an indenture holder. And we'll talk a little bit about apprenticeships, indentures in just a moment. We also were given John's age, and this actually lines up with his birth date of 1838, which is great. So we know that we're looking probably at the same individual. So using all of this information, we can start sort of working through other documents in Virginia Untold. We could put it aside, or we could put our other searches aside and we could start searching by Minerva. I am particularly interested in Charles T. Scott and what's going on in this sort of freedom suit. Why is John held in bondage by this individual? Who is Charles T. Scott? How did he come to be enslaved if he's born free? There's a lot of questions that are surfacing from taking a look at this freedom suit. But let's start by going back to our search results. So we just worked through freedom suit, and we're going to move on to the indenture of apprenticeship, which is just right underneath of it. So let's see what this document might hold for us. I'm just going to click on, again, the title or the image. It's going to take me to that intermediary page that provides a description. And I'm going to select Available at Rosetta Digital Repository. So here we have our actual indenture of apprenticeship. This document is also transcribed, which I will provide on the next screen here, but I just wanted to give you a little snapshot of what it looks like. So the transcription reads that this indenture made this 5th day of March in the year 1852 between Minerva Ann Simmons, mother of John B. Simmons, a free boy of color, under 14th year of age, of the one part, and Robert A. Leslie of the other part, all of the city of Petersburg, that the said M.A. Simmons, by virtue and an order of permission of the Hustings Court, bearing date, has put in place and bound out, and by these presents does place and bind John B. Simmons, her son. The rest of the apprenticeship indenture goes on sort of with the stock language that explains what John will be responsible for as an apprentice, so that he's bound to Robert, what Robert A. Leslie will provide. It also tells us that John will be taught the occupation of a tobacconist, which makes sense if you're thinking about Petersburg at this time. In 52, it's certainly a site of a lot of industrial revolution and a manufacturing hub, certainly for tobacco. So that's making sense. I'm noticing the date here at the top of the page. This contract, I think, was actually created just immediately after the results of the freedom suit. So the court rules that John is to be discharged from Charles T. Scott, and he's entered into an apprenticeship contract with this man, Robert A. Leslie. And so this actually is kind of what's tinging me, thinking that the situation in the freedom suit may mean that John was held illegally in a previous indenture contract with Charles T. Scott. And we actually know that this was happening quite often with free Black children, where indenture holders would hold children past their date of service, were treating them cruelly. Essentially, these contracts were sometimes acting as another form of slavery for free Black boys and girls. That could be what's happening with Charles T. Scott. We're not entirely sure. However, we essentially know the results of the freedom suit, that John enters into a new contract with Robert Leslie. We also received the middle name of Minerva, which helps us even more with our searching and sort of eliminating other Minerva Simmons that might be out there. Age, again, is lining up with the birth date that we were using for John in the register book. And then we also learned, like I said, that he's manufacturing tobacco. So I'm now interested in if I can find any more information about Charles, this should be T, Scott, in our database. And I think I'm going to try an advanced search eventually, actually, to try to find this. So we were searching with a general search earlier, but let's use an advanced search now in Virginia Untold to demonstrate how this particular search query works. So I'm looking specifically for a record type that I know of. I'm going to go to the field section here and select in the drop-down menu record type. I'm also then going to type Charles Scott into just a general line. If I wanted, I could select the title, but I want to try to pick up Charles Scott in any sort of piece of the document. So I'm just going to leave these other drop-down fields blank. So this is going to tell me what I'm searching. I click the search button, and I only find 2 results in all of Virginia Untold. So that's a little frustrating to me. It's actually not great search results. I'm seeing a Scott here, but this appears to be the actual individual that's apprenticed out. So I don't think that this is the man I'm looking for. I could look in Charlotte County here, but that's off in terms of region and locality. So I don't really care for these search results. If I were doing this in real time or in real life, I would probably abandon this particular line of searching in the database. But I wouldn't necessarily give up on Charles Scott. We actually have a lot of records, or there are a lot of records that are extant from Petersburg. So I'm pretty confident that we could find information about this individual. and we could learn a little bit more context. Is he doing this with other free Black individuals? Does he have a track record of treating his enslaved people cruelly? What is his occupation? Could we learn more about him? This is also a good thing to note. You might have noticed that Charles' first name was abbreviated to CH. So when you're searching in the database, just remember that sometimes things like Thomas or John will be abbreviated, and you may need to search by those abbreviations in addition to their full name. But I'm going to actually pivot to searching a different trail, since we have now so much information about Minerva Simmons. And let's check that out. So I'm going to utilize the general search function again, because it works pretty well. And what I did was I just typed Minerva Simmons directly into my search bar. And I'm finding another promising amount of material, 11 results about who could potentially be our Minerva Simmons. So I'm seeing some familiar documents, the Freedom Suit, the apprenticeship indenture that we just looked at. Then I'm also seeing this other individual, Julius Thomas Jefferson Simmons, which is likely Minerva's other child. I'm just kind of assuming here. I didn't actually click on this document. But if we know that she is hiring out one of her sons, it makes sense that she might be doing that, or at least contracting them out with another son as well. So, we could click on that, learn a little bit more about John's brother if we wanted. But I'm actually going to take the time to talk about some of these tax lists and colonization lists that show up further down in our search results. So one of the first records that comes up in these lists that I was just mentioning is a Prince George 1835 list of free Negroes. And just quickly glancing at the document, I actually see that it's titled as a colonization record, which is interesting, but also demands a little explanation. So let's talk a little bit about colonization records. This collection in Virginia Untold includes a lot of different types of records. It is meant to demonstrate what was a state collection here at the library. It includes lists of free Black individuals who were willing to immigrate and ship lists of individuals who actually did immigrate to Liberia. But there are also lists in this collection of individuals that did not immigrate, that were not interested in going to Liberia. The Commissioner of the Revenue is responsible for, at certain times in Virginia's history, going around and creating lists or censuses of free Black individuals in the localities. They're also responsible for creating lists for tax purposes. Some of these lists were actually submitted or used to take census of how many free people were in a various locality in the 1830s at the time that the state is interested in forming groups of individuals to go back to Liberia. So that means that you can find some lists of individuals, of free people of color in this collection that had no intention whatsoever of going to Liberia, but they were submitted as a part of this collection. So that's something that's really important to recognize. I actually selected the document here. We've indexed it, so that means that it's searchable, just like the transcription. So luckily Minerva comes up actually on the first page here, but if I didn't immediately see her name, I'd actually do a Control F search and search Minerva. I see 3 results here, but the first hit is a Minerva unidentified as a female, 28 years old, 3 children, and look at her place of abode, Colonel Heath's land. So that's reminding me of the name Austin Heath, who was the original emancipator of John's family, aka Minerva's ancestors. So this is definitely setting off some alarm bells again, that this could be my particular individual. I'd have to check the date, her age, to see if that's lining up, but I think that this could be Minerva. So these lists and the tax list that I'm going to show you in just a minute, or at least point out, are really helpful in placing an individual in a place and time. They're not always narrative heavy. They don't provide a lot of content like the Freedom Suit does, But we can confirm that in 1835, Minerva was in Prince George, and she's living at Colonel Heath's land. And she has 3 children that are listed with her at this time. So this is really useful to us if we are doing some genealogical research on this family. This is the original document. If you look down here at the bottom of the screen, Minerva, FN refers to free Negro, and then we see and 3 children. So if we could work through the original document too, if you so choose. So we just selected the 1835 list of Negroes, but we also see in our search results on that original page, there's an 1858 delinquent tax list and an 1859 delinquent tax list. This 58 one includes a John Simmons, and this 59 includes an M.A. Simmons, which I would assume to be Minerva because she's from Petersburg. So it'd be interesting to compare. She's in Prince George in 35, but by 59, she's moved into Petersburg. So again, these lists are going to help us locate individuals in a certain place and time, and we could continue going through some of those hits to sort of line up where people are over the various years. So I'm just going to follow up on a few other points and then transition us into sort of a story, essentially, of the power of Virginia Untold. Before I move out of my demonstration section of the presentation, I just want to point out something that I may have alluded to, but not explicitly stated. We actually index all of the records in Virginia Untold. We go in and we pull out the important information from each record and drop it into an Excel spreadsheet that breaks it out by that data point. All of these spreadsheets live online and are publicly accessible, and they're very useful if you prefer to search in this manner. So one thing that we have done as a part of the grant is we have started a collaboration with enslaved.org where we're submitting these indexes to this particular site. But we've also made them available through the Virginia Open Data Portal, which collects information from state agencies around Virginia. So you can use this URL to go directly to the site, and if you just type Virginia Untold into a search bar, it will pull up the record types that we have added to the Virginia Open Data Portal, all of the ones associated with this project. Selecting any one of them will take you to a sort of an explanation page. It will talk about the data set, but the buttons at the top right here will provide an export tab. You could click on either of these CSV files and download them and access the actual spreadsheet that we created. We've taken all spreadsheets from each locality associated with a certain record type and combined it into one huge Excel document. So if data is your thing, that is a great way to access that information. I'm going to conclude the presentation by talking about a story of 2 enslaved individuals, Richard and Tazewell. This particular story was actually a blog post that I wrote when I first started here as project manager. I came across this information in the Richmond City Hustings Court records that I was processing. Tazewell was an enslaved man living in Richmond City, and he actually runs away in 1856. He is actually aided in his escape by his uncle, Richard, who's also enslaved in Richmond City. Essentially, I know all of this because Richard comes into the store and tells his friend, Columbus, who's also enslaved, all the details of what has happened here. And that is actually Richard's downfall, because Columbus goes and tells the city sergeant what he's learned from Richard, and the city sergeant arrests Richard and charges him with the crime of aiding an enslaved person to abscond. And that's the document you see on the left side of the screen there. Richard explains to Columbus a number of different details related to Tazewell's escape, including that he helped him get away with $40, gave him food and clothing. He gives a couple different stories for how Tazewell gets away, including going off in the cars. Then he changes it to talking about going in a boat. He provides information about a reward that's placed in the newspapers for Tazewell's capture. which immediately said to me that I should look in the newspapers for that runaway enslaved ad to see if I could find Tazewell's particular entry. And I actually did find that particular newspaper account in our Virginia Chronicle database, which is a digitized resource of Virginia newspapers that are available through the Library of Virginia. So it's a great resource if you are doing newspaper research. Again, this is free. The newspaper ad, the runaway ad, gives me so much information about Tazewell. It tells me how old he is, his physical description. It provides the name of his wife, who was a free woman, where she lives. It confirms the name of Tazewell's enslaver and even where he's located. I used all of this information to find more information about Tazewell's wife, Eliza, who shows up actually in the minute books. She loses her free papers a number of times, and she's actually put in jail for not having her free papers. I learned using the city directories where Thomas Jones was located. I also found out that for particular years, there are records kept of enslaved people that were escaping via the Underground Railroad through New York. So doing some additional newspaper research, I learned that Tazewell actually makes it to Canada. He sends a letter to Richard, which the letter I have not found, but the newspapers indicate that he sends a letter to Richard indicating that he's made it safely. Well, since I know that Tazewell has made it north, I learned about this Record of Fugitives book that just happened to be created in one of the years that Tazewell runs away, 1856. And I thought to myself, there was no way that I could possibly find Tazewell. But I actually do. He shows up on the right side of the screen here. The bottom entry, March 20th, 1856, is an entry for Tazewell Robinson, who belonged to Thomas Jones, a grocer of Richmond, which is how Thomas Jones is referred to in the city directory. It explained to me that he walks to City Point, which is modern day Hopewell, Virginia. Explains that he gets on a steamer, which is confirmed in the newspapers, and that he makes it all the way to an outpost in New York. The newspapers confirm that he makes it into Syracuse, and from there he goes into Canada. All of this started with a bundle of papers that looked very much like this. I pulled out this court case, and I could have never realized, if I hadn't followed this trail, that all of this information existed about Tazewell. I was able to find this entire story because we decided to open this box. So I think it just showcases the real power of digitizing these records and making them available. Unfortunately, Richard is sentenced. He's tried and convicted. He's sentenced to 10 lashes and to be sold. And I actually don't know what happens to Richard. All of this, again, is documented in a 2-part blog series that I wrote and can be accessed using those URLs on the screen there. I like this story of Richard and Tazewell because it talks about it certainly demonstrates sort of the interesting things that are going on in Richmond at this time. Certainly how active the Underground Railroad is, and a number of enslaved people are trying to escape using the help of other enslaved people. They're also using the help of free white and other free black individuals in the city. And you can just see how Richmond is attracting a lot of different populations and illuminating a really interesting form of urban slavery that I don't think we always understand or talk about as well as maybe this traditional form of slavery that some of us are more familiar with. The Richmond City Hustings Court records, which we really hope to put online very soon, are also really important because no register book survives or was maintained even for Richmond City that we know of. What we actually think is happening is the clerk is using the minute books to record these registrations. But it just means that the loose records, so that means these criminal trials, but also free registration papers, petitions to remain, freedom suits, all of these loose documents from the court help to tell the story of free people of color in the city, since we don't have that register book. So just some other resources to be aware of. The Virginia Open Data Portal is something I've already mentioned. You can access our blog using that URL. And then I briefly mentioned an opportunity to get involved in our transcription or indexing projects through Virginia Untold. We crowdsource most of the transcription and indexing. If you would like to join us, please use the URL from the page.com/LVA. Signing up for an account is free, and you can access actually all the collections that we make available on that site from the Library of Virginia. We also try to update via social media and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook regularly about Virginia Untold, in addition to posting on the blog every other month. So thank you so much for tuning in today. Please know that you can contact me. My contact information is provided on the screen.